Today's video focuses on the disappearance of Stephan Mitchell Adams, who vanished in 2004 after giving an unidentified man a lift. Was this a case of vigilante justice, or was it a tragic accident? Let's investigate. If you enjoy mysteries, true crime, disappearances and the occasional conspiracy, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. I also have a Patreon, so if you'd like to support the channel and access some bonus content, I'll leave a link in the description. Stephan Adams was 26 years old when he disappeared from Tahlequah, Oklahoma on the 13th of December 2004. That morning, he completed a final examination at Northeastern State University. He had been studying engineering, and according to some reports, was last seen leaving the campus in his white truck. Just after 11 AM, Stephan had a phone call with his girlfriend, Brianna, in which he told her his exam had gone well and that he was giving a man a lift to Keys, around a 20-minute drive from Tahlequah. This man has never been identified, and it's not known whether Stephan knew him or not. You'd think his girlfriend would know this information, but it's not public knowledge. I couldn't really find any information at all on Brianna either. Stephan told Brianna that he'd call her back, presumably when he'd given the man a lift, but he never did. At around 11:30 AM, his cousin, who he lived with at the time, called his phone and it rang once before going to voicemail. All calls after that went straight to voicemail without ringing. It's possible that Stephan's phone was turned off, or he was in an area where there was no signal, or he was on the phone to someone else at the time when his cousin called. Between 11:30 AM and 12 PM, he was seen at a convenience store in Cookson, a 12-minute drive from Keys. Looking at the route on Google Maps, it seems likely that Stephan went to the convenience store after dropping the man off in Keys. Stephan reportedly purchased a soda, then stood outside for around 5 minutes before leaving in his truck. A witness stated that he appeared to be agitated and upset. There are a few conflicting reports in this case. According to an FBI poster, the last time anyone saw Stephan was when he left the university campus. However, other sources, such as the Charlie Project, mention this sighting at the convenience store. The FBI poster lists Stephan's race as white, whereas most other sources state that he was Native American. There also seems to be variations in how the name is spelt. The most common seems to be Stephan, but I've also seen Stephen and Steven. So that's just something to be aware of if you choose to research the case further. Stephan planned to visit his mother in Webbers Falls that day, so the convenience store was on his way to Webbers Falls. But his mother never saw him that day and has never seen him since. Stephan was supposed to go to work at 5 PM that day but never showed up. He also never finished the rest of his exams. He hasn't used his phone since, and there has been no activity on his checking account. He left all his personal belongings behind and money was left in his dresser. It's also believed that he was low on gas, though I'm not really sure how that could be confirmed. Even without giving the man a lift, the journey to his mother's and back would have been around 2 hours, so he would have needed a decent amount of gas to make that journey. As with any missing persons case, there tends to be a few general possibilities, one being foul play, another being accidental death where the body was never found, and another being voluntary disappearance. We don't really have any reason to believe that Stephan would voluntarily disappear. His girlfriend said he seemed to be in a good mood when they spoke on the phone, and I couldn't find anything to suggest that they had anything but a happy relationship. He'd just completed an exam and was pretty close to starting a new career. He also had a daughter that he'd been fighting for custody of. Things had been a bit rough for him in the last couple of years, we'll get onto that soon, but at this point he seemed to be doing pretty well for himself and didn't have any obvious reason to want to leave everything behind. That said, there doesn't always have to be an obvious reason as to why someone would want to start a new life. It wouldn't be the first time that a seemingly happy person has done so. He left money and his belongings, including both his inhalers at home, but I imagine if he planned to voluntarily disappear, he probably saved up money in advance without anyone knowing, and left the rest of his things behind to throw people off the scent. I still consider this to be the least likely possibility though, just because there isn't any evidence to suggest that's what he did, and there are other circumstances surrounding his disappearance which are pretty suspicious. Another possibility is that somehow Stephan died accidentally and his body has just never been found. A comment on a web sleuth thread on this case suggested that he might have crashed his car. The comment read, "I have a theory in this case. I think that which happens most often is more likely. In Adam's case, I think he left the Keys area and was driving to Webbers Falls to see his mother. That is a very curvy road with deep ravines. I believe because of his young age he was travelling at an unsafe speed and ran off the road. I think the reason they cannot find him is that they are looking for a white truck, when the reality is you would only see the undercarriage of the truck, which would be very hard to see in a wood area. There is also a place along that road where he could have run off the road and landed in water. The road splits before it gets to Weber's Falls, and I don't know which road he would have taken, as I have never driven that far. I don't think he met with foul play, I think he was driving too fast and ran off the road. That theory sounds pretty plausible. I think if Stephan did die accidentally, it's definitely the most likely theory, as we've got no reason to believe that he would have been in any other situation that might have resulted in his accidental death. It's unlikely he got lost somewhere and his car broke down. He was going to visit his mother, which was a journey I'm sure he's made plenty of times before. He would have known the way, so he's not likely to have got lost. And if his car broke down on the road somewhere on the way, you would think it had been found by now. Death as a result of exposure seems unlikely because as far as we know he had no reason to exit the vehicle, and again his vehicle was never found. I think to assume that he must have been speeding because of his age is a little unfair, but there are many other reasons why he could have ended up crashing his car or getting run off the road. As with any case, there is a small possibility that Stephan could have ended his own life, but if he did, his family didn't see it coming and his body's never been found. The most likely theory, the one that Stephan's family and the police believe, is that Stephan met with foul play. The family hired a private investigator shortly after who told reporters that he believed that Stephan had disappeared as a result of foul play, but couldn't determine who might have been involved. A few weeks after his disappearance, the family received a phone call from an unidentified person stating that they would be harmed if the investigation continued. Now this could have been some sort of sick prank, but if not, it's extremely likely that Stephan was a victim of foul play. The last person known to have been with Stephan before he disappeared was the unidentified man that he gave a lift to. He told Brianna himself that he was giving him a lift, and Brianna heard the man's voice in the background. Stephan's mother, Deanie Hayes, did an interview for the Unfound podcast in which she stated she believed the man was a hitchhiker, but implied that it would be unusual for Stephan to give someone a lift who he didn't know. It's hard to know if the hitchhiker had anything to do with Stephan's disappearance, but it is suspicious that the next time he was seen, he appeared agitated. Could Stephan have known this man? Did the man threaten him or tell him something that upset him? But the hitchhiker isn't the only mysterious person in this case that could have possibly been involved in Stephan's disappearance. An unidentified man who was described as white, just under 6 feet tall, with brown and grey colour-length hair, was seen at a Dollar General store near Stephan's apartment on the morning of his disappearance. The man was acting a little strange. He arrived at the store at 7:50 AM and hung around the car park for hours, claiming he was waiting for someone, but no one was seen meeting him. He mentioned to a passerby that he worked at a construction site in Keys. This led me to wonder if this might have been the man that Stephan gave the lift to. Assuming that was the case, then it seems that this man was waiting specifically for Stephan and not just anyone who could have given him a lift. This man wouldn't have actually needed a lift though. He had his grey pickup truck with him and drove it out of the car park just before 11 AM, around the time that Stephan disappeared. Seeing as we don't know where Stephan picked up the hitchhiker, maybe this man spotted him driving past and decided to follow him and pretend to be a hitchhiker somehow. It does sound a bit contrived though. This man probably wasn't the hitchhiker, and it's possible that he had nothing to do with the disappearance. It could just be a coincidence. This man is not considered a suspect, but police believe he may have information on the disappearance. According to crimeblogger1983.blogspot.com, a Muskogee Phoenix article, which I couldn't access, stated that a witness came forward about a suspicious stranger in the school parking lot where Stephan parked his truck. Investigators believe at least 4 very organised people may have been involved in what they believe was eventually the abduction of Stephan Adams. I couldn't find another source corroborating that, so take it with a pinch of salt, but it doesn't seem impossible that a small group of people could have worked together to make Stephan disappear. Now's probably a good time to mention the main suspects in this case, and this is where the plot really thickens. I mentioned earlier that Stephan was in the middle of a custody battle for his daughter, Cheyenne, who was around 4 years old at the time of his disappearance. Stephan had been married to a woman named Alicia. It sounds like the marriage didn't end particularly well, but for some time, after a judge ruled that Stephan should have contact with his daughter, he was able to regularly see her without any problems. Then after a while, Alicia stopped contact. And that's when she made a serious accusation against Stephan, alleging that he had inappropriate contact, so to speak, with his daughter. Charges were brought against Stephan twice as a result of this, but both times he was found not guilty due to lack of evidence. I don't know every specific detail of the trial, but Dini said in the interview that there had been a witness who gave a statement, and when they were asked what happened in court, they couldn't recall what they had written. She also said that a child psychiatrist had asked Cheyenne what had happened and determined that the accusations were not true. I'm not sure exactly what's meant by that, whether Cheyenne herself claimed something had happened or if Alicia claimed it and then Cheyenne told the psychiatrist that it wasn't true. I don't really know what to make of this. Lack of evidence doesn't mean that someone didn't commit a crime. Just because he was found not guilty doesn't mean that he can't have done this. It would also be an awful thing for Alicia to fabricate. But at the same time, if he was found not guilty, I don't think it's fair to just assume that this did happen without any evidence to prove it. Sadly, people can and do make things like this up. It's not completely unheard of. Stephan and Alicia got married shortly after she got pregnant. From what Dini said, it sounds like Alicia was never really fully into the marriage. I think she just got married because she thought it would be the done thing if they were having a baby together. Apparently Alicia's father was not at all happy that they got married. It angered him and it sounds like he didn't believe that Stephan was good enough for his daughter. Maybe he managed to convince Alicia of that too, and that could be why they ended up getting divorced. Interestingly, Alicia's father apparently threatened to kill Stephan at the trial because of what he thought that he'd done to Cheyenne. That could totally be a coincidence, but it's very unfortunate timing considering that Stephan disappeared shortly after. If the accusations were not true, it's possible that Alicia made them up, but her father still believed it, and that's why he hated Stephan so much. Or maybe the father was the one to plant the idea in Alicia's head, hoping that it might get rid of him and that he'd get sent down for it, but when that didn't work, maybe he decided to take stronger action. But this is all just speculation. Really, we have no idea whether or not the accusations were true. It doesn't really make a difference in terms of whether or not Alicia and her family are realistic suspects in this case, though. If the claims were true, that's a pretty valid reason for them to want Stephan out of their lives. Maybe Alicia feared for her daughter's safety and decided to arrange a hit on him. If the claims weren't true, it shows that Alicia hated Stephan enough to make up something like that about him. And if she had that level of resentment against him, is it that much of a stretch to consider the possibility that she might have wanted him dead? But is there any evidence to suggest that Alicia might have actually been involved? There's nothing solid, but aside from a possible motive and a couple of coincidences, there are a few interesting things to note. Alicia reportedly failed a lie detector test in relation to Stephan's disappearance. Now that's not really too compelling because we know that lie detectors aren't 100% reliable, hence they can't be used in court. There were a couple of things that stood out to me that Dini had said in the interview, but before I get onto those things, I just think it's important to note that the family aren't always the most reliable sources. I don't mean any disrespect to Dini whatsoever, and I'm not at all for a second suggesting that she might have intentionally lied about anything in the case, but there are a few inconsistencies in things that she said. She doesn't seem 100% sure on some details, and some things seem to be things that have just been passed on to her by other people and don't always seem 100% reliable. Again, I'm not at all suggesting that Dini intentionally lied about anything, but the case was a long time ago. I'm sure anyone would forget small details. She also suffered a stroke the day after Stephan disappeared, and she said that still causes her problems to this day. As for victims' families in general, it's easy to see how they might develop tunnel vision. If they have a theory that they're really set on, it's possible that they could be biased towards or against certain pieces of information or rumours that they might hear. Anyway, according to Dini, the witness who saw Stephan at the convenience store in Cookson was Alicia's mother's brother's sister-in-law. Dini replied that she thinks that's quite a coincidence and that maybe this woman was lying to cover up for Alicia or someone else. If it's true that this was who reported seeing Stephan at the store, that is a bit coincidental, but I personally think it's a bit of a stretch to suggest that a distant, not even really a relative of Alicia's, would be willing to lie for her in regards to a man's disappearance. How many people are that close to their mum's brother's sister-in-law? I'm not ruling it out, maybe she was coerced or bribed. Dini seems to think that Alicia's mum's brother, Spencer, was involved in the disappearance, so that makes the connection a little bit closer. But I'm not going to put too much weight on that theory because there's just no evidence for it. It's a lot to think that the whole family were involved, so I think on the whole, the sighting seems at least somewhat credible to me. When initially asked about the sketch of the man who was at Dollar General, Dini said that she had no idea who it could be, but when prompted by the interviewer, she says it could have been a man named James, who was a friend of Spencer, Alicia's mother's brother. This seems to tie in with her theory that Spencer could have been involved. Again, I wouldn't completely rule this out, and if this man was James, things are looking even more suspicious. But I think it's a possibility that Deanie is making links where there aren't any, because she's just so convinced that Alicia's family must be involved. I'd be interested to see how similar James looks to this sketch, but without any photos available, it's impossible to know. According to Tahlequah Daily Press, a petition was filed which alleged that the man who Stephen gave a lift to was Ronnie Meachling. I'm not sure if this is confirmed, hence I didn't mention it earlier, as this is the only source I could access that states this. Charlie Project and most other sources state that the man is unidentified. If true, I'm not sure what, if any, connection this man might have to Stephen or his disappearance, or to Alicia and her family. The petition also states that a witness saw Stephen being beaten, but again, I couldn't find any other sources to back this up, or any further information about that. The petition also states that authorities refused the family access to the evidence they had on the disappearance. Deanie stated in the interview that Alicia came from a good family. I don't necessarily think that she meant that they were good people per se, because this was around the time that she was saying that Alicia's father thought that Stephen wasn't good enough for her. I don't want to read too much into this, but I wonder if she meant that the family had a reputation or maybe even had contacts. This is pure speculation, but I wonder if that could explain the lack of cooperation from authorities in the case. If Alicia's family were involved, maybe they had contacts in the prosecution who helped them prevent an investigation going through, or maybe they even paid people off. Again, it's just a thought, there's no evidence to prove this, but I think there's often more corruption that goes on in the police department than many people realise. If Stephen was murdered, the most likely suspects are Alicia's family, but it's not impossible that he could have been a random target of foul play by someone else entirely. Or maybe he was mixed up in something else that we don't know about. Without knowing this man personally, it's impossible to know whether there might have been individuals who would want to harm him. It's hard to come up with a concrete theory for this case because no matter what you think, you have to rely on at least some things that aren't proven facts. I'm pretty confident that sadly Stephen is probably dead, and that his death was as a result of foul play. But if we believe the sighting of him in the convenience store, it's unlikely the hitchhiker had anything to do with it because he was seen alone, probably after he dropped the man off. And assuming Stephen planned to head straight to his mother's house, how could anyone have killed him on the way unless he picked up another hitchhiker, or someone managed to lure him out of his vehicle, or he stopped somewhere else on the way? But there just isn't any evidence to suggest any of this, and any foul play theory just seems like a bit of a stretch. There are many suspicious details, such as the two men who were acting suspiciously and thought to possibly be involved in the disappearance, but they could just be red herrings. If I really had to pick a theory, I'd probably say that it's possible that Alicia's family could have been involved. They're the only people in this story that we know to have a motive to want to make Stephen disappear. Stephen went missing only a few days before an important court hearing related to custody of Cheyenne, and authorities don't believe this was a coincidence according to Charlie Project. But I'm not 100% convinced, and I'd probably put the accidental death theory as a close second, just because I can't think of a foul play theory that explains everything. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe that Stephen might have been murdered, or do you think he could have died accidentally, or do you have another theory entirely? If you have any information on the disappearance of Stephan Adams, please contact the Oklahoma Police Department. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Thursday in a new video.